Hours before Russia was due to begin the latest round of ceasefire talks, it launched yet another barrage of missiles, this time targeting the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy. In the now all too familiar scene, smoke billowed from an apartment block and firefighters hurried to evacuate residents amid reports that 74 people had so far been injured, including 14 children. Local officials said a school and a medical facility had also been damaged. It's no wonder people are desperate for this war to end. The latest attack came as Russian and American officials met in Saudi Arabia to hammer out the details of a partial ceasefire that will, in theory, see Moscow and Ukraine stop attacking each other's energy infrastructure. Kyiv also hopes for a deal to allow its ships safe passage in the Black Sea, through which it exports tens of millions of tons of grain and fertilizer. If, and it's a big if, both those elements can be agreed, a 30-day ceasefire will be put in place and negotiations will begin on a permanent peace. If he's serious, President Zelenskyy says Vladimir Putin could easily bring about peace.
No matter what we discuss with our partners now, we need to get Putin to give real orders to stop the strikes. Whoever brought this war must take it back.
In an interview with Time magazine published today, President Zelenskyy didn't dwell on that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office, but he did say he believed some members of Trump's team had been influenced by Russian information, a question that was put to the president today during his cabinet meeting.
What do you have to say to that?
Well, probably they have been influenced to get this thing settled because Ukraine wants to see it settled. I think they have to have it settled, and Russia wants to see it settled.
Trump claimed the US and Ukraine was once again close to agreeing a minerals deal, and he talked about the thorny issue of dividing up land illegally annexed by Russia, even though he knows Kyiv will never accept Russian sovereignty over occupied Ukrainian territory.
We're talking about territory right now. We're talking about lines of demarcation. We're talking about power plant ownership. Some people are saying the United States should own the power plant and then work it that way because we have the expertise to fix it up, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay. That would something like that would be fine with me. But they are talking about ownership of the big nuclear power plant in particular. But all of these things will come up, and they have come up, and that has been discussed, yes.
It's not clear who is making the suggestion that the US own Ukrainian power plants other than Trump himself. Trump, who is continuing to paint a rosy picture of the prospects for peace, even as the missiles continue to rain down across Ukraine.
Well, attacking schools and hospitals in war zones is considered illegal under international law. So why, in places like Gaza and Ukraine, are bombs dropping frequently and for the most part without consequence? Kisu Nia is an international human rights lawyer and the director of the Strategic Litigation Project at the Atlantic Council. And she joins us now from Los Angeles. Why are we in this age of impunity, it seems?
There's a lot of reasons. I mean, one sad thing is that unfortunately there has been an increase in attacks on hospitals prior to this as well. We saw that in Syria. The Russian authorities were using that playbook in Syria. They're now repeating that in Ukraine. We now see it in Gaza. Unfortunately, there has been almost no criminal prosecutions for that crime of targeting hospitals. And there needs to be a real concerted effort from the globe to really enforce the Geneva Conventions and take this seriously. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that leadership.
Yes, I mean, there's little question of that. I mean, how important is the fact that the key parties aren't signatories to the ICC?
So there's a few separate things here. One is that I think that the burden, the idea in the collective consciousness about what the burden is to show that, you know, attacks on hospitals are somehow justified, that they have somehow changed their character from being a civilian to a military target, has gotten really gray and very ambiguous. It seems now that the burden of proof has been saying, you know, there are Hamas fighters in these hospitals. That's it. Barely any evidence put forward. And then that is the assumption that is brought forward. But that is not the case. There is a very, very high threshold to shift the character of a hospital from civilian to military, and that involves a very high threshold that isn't being met in terms of Russia or Israel not being members of the ICC. We do see that there are arrest warrants that have been issued for both Putin and Netanyahu. Those arrest warrants do not cover, I should note, they do not cover attacks on hospitals or schools. However, they do come under the jurisdiction of the court. And we do see that even now there's, a bright spot. A couple weeks ago, we saw that the former leader of the Philippines, Duterte, was taken to The Hague after an arrest warrant was issued to him. True, it was due to shifting political sands, but the Philippines is no longer a member of the ICC, but the crimes that were covered were at a time that the Philippines was a member, and that's still proceeding. So I don't see that as an excuse. I think we're just lacking leadership and countries really taking a firm stance.
I mean, Russia doesn't really engage with the argument very much in public. Israel does, and always claims that its targets are legitimate because of its claimed presence of, in this case on Sunday, they said this man wasn't receiving hospital treatment. He was using the hospital as a shield. Now, our doctors on the ground said that wasn't true, who we spoke to earlier. But if it had been true, would that be a defense?
This is where we start to get into the gray area, because a lot of times there's a doubt, right? There's a doubt put forward that a civilian object has lost its protective status. But even in those cases, the attacker has to assume that is protected, that object is protected. The burden of demonstrating that protective status is with the person, with the party that is firing the rocket or aiming the missile. And I think that's where we've really lost that in this argument. A lot of times there's speculation about who these individuals are. The intelligence is not put forward in a transparent way, and that's happened time and time again. And so what needs to happen here is a lot more transparency. If there is evidence showing that, it really needs to be laid out in a much more transparent manner, because the burden does lie with the attacking party. One thing I'll say that's very disappointing is that there was going to be a meeting this month in Geneva among the contracting parties to the Geneva Convention to really shore up the responsibilities of the 196 contracting parties. And that meeting was canceled. And it was announced on the eve of when the meeting was supposed to happen. And the states said that they weren't satisfied with the declaration. We need to see a lot more robust leadership from the contracting parties, and also an understanding that attacks on hospitals and schools are just not acceptable.
Kishania, thank you very much indeed.